Welcome everyone. My name is Andrew Podob and I'm a PhD student in the Department of Political Science. I am joined today by Dr. Paul Beck, Professor Emeritus in the Department of Political Science at Ohio State. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Good to be with you, Andrew.
Let's jump right in. You were in Chicago for the Democratic National Convention in August 1968. What was that like?
It was an incredible scene. There were demonstrators in the streets. There were squadrons of police in the interior courtyards of buildings, kind of out of sight, but clearly there, in full riot gear. The demonstrators were protesting really the nomination of the pending nomination of Hubert Humphrey as the Democratic candidate for president that year. It seems incredible in these days to think back to a time when the primaries really didn't matter. Humphrey had won no primaries. He had entered the campaign after the filing dates for the primaries in most of the states. Lyndon Johnson that year had declared right at the end of March that he was not going to run for a second term as president. And so it threw things just kind of wide open. Johnson had just won the New Hampshire primary, but finishing in second place to him was an anti-war candidate, and Vietnam really was the issue that year, was an anti-war candidate, Gene McCarthy. And McCarthy had come in second in New Hampshire. But I think that Johnson felt so embarrassed by almost being beaten in New Hampshire. It was really tired of the war. It wasn't his war, really, but he had kind of overseen the buildup. We, by that time, had, if I remember correctly, 500,000 troops in Vietnam. Things weren't going particularly well there. So Johnson bows out. There's a mad scramble for the nomination. Robert Kennedy joins the fray as a candidate for the Democratic nomination. McCarthy was there. There were others. You go to Chicago then in the late summer of 1968. Delegates are there. They're in the hotels along Michigan Avenue. The convention was in the stockyard, so they had to be transported to a convention hall that was just outside of the stockyards, which meant that they had to come outside and kind of mingle with the crowd. And the crowd was full of thousands of anti-war demonstrators and a Chicago Police Department under Mayor Daley's leadership as mayor that was determined not to let the situation get out of control. And it very quickly got out of control. Many of the delegates in these hotels, particularly the Hilton Hotel on Michigan Avenue, were tear-gassed. Couldn't open the windows of the hotel. The tear gas was floating through the entryway of the hotel. They really couldn't go outside. It was the kind of scene where someone like me, who wanted to interview delegates and ask them a whole series of questions about their political views and the like, simply couldn't get access to them. Reporters couldn't get access to them. They were transported often in buses with armed escorts to the stockyards for the convention. And as I said, the protesters were outside. And before too long, there was real conflict, actual physical conflict between the police who were trying to clear the streets and the protesters who were bound and determined that they weren't going to be deterred from making their protest. The other thing to add about that year, some people have asked me, well, is there a comparable year to 2016? And you almost have to go back to 1968 just in terms of the kind of drama that was there. The other thing that I think has happened is that the police forces have become much more sophisticated in how they handle these kinds of demonstrations and protests, not to let them get out of hand. And part of it was, what happened in Chicago was often described as a police riot, where the police were out there clubbing and beating demonstrators, hauling them away.
Was it scary?
It was scary.
You were frightened?
Well, I realized that I just needed to get out of there. And I had seen these kinds of things happen before, not firsthand, but I kind of knew what was going on. I grew up near Chicago and knew also that the Chicago police could be very violent if need be, and they really felt a need to be violent there. They really wanted to clear out the demonstrators, but there were thousands of them. The whole area around Grant Park and up and down Michigan Avenue was just teeming with people who were demonstrators, largely against the war, but also against the Humphrey nomination.